Welcome, my name is Clémence Gossett, and today I'm going to teach you how to make macarons. They're delicate little Parisian sandwich cookies that seem really difficult to make, but they're actually quite easy. So I'm going to teach you the proper technique for making the batter. We're also going to learn how to pipe them properly, and by the end of class, you'll have some beautiful macarons that we'll sandwich together with two kinds of filling we're going to make. We're going to make a buttercream and flavor it a few different ways. We're also going to make salted caramel. So let's get started. Let's get started by talking about the ingredients here. They're not that hard to find and they're not very expensive, and the recipe we gave you is just for one tray of cookies. So you'll get between 9 and 12 macarons. You can always double or triple the recipe, but this way, you can limit it to just a few macarons to start with as you're getting good with the process. To begin with, you need some powdered sugar, which is also known as confectioner's sugar. You need some almond flour. Almond flour is made by very finely chopping almonds. And if you can't find almond flour, you can use almond meal. Typically has little specks of some of the skin of the almond still in the meal. They're not blanched, which is totally fine to use and interchangeable. Or you can use whole nuts and pulverize them with the powdered sugar in your food processor to make a flour. You want to do it with the powdered sugar so it doesn't turn into a nut paste, because there's cornstarch in powdered sugar and that'll absorb any oil that comes out. So these are our dry ingredients, and I'm going to add a little pinch of salt, just like that, just for flavor to balance out all the sweetness. Then we have our egg whites. Now, a lot of blogs and cookbooks will tell you that you have to age your egg whites for 5 days to 2 weeks. And I can tell you, after years of making macarons, I have not seen a big enough difference in batch to batch using new versus aged egg whites to warrant prepping out my baking 3 days ahead of time or 5 days. So I don't want you to worry about that. What does really help is making sure the egg whites are room temperature. And then we have this little ingredient here called cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is used to stabilize the egg whites. If you don't have cream of tartar, don't worry about it. For starters, don't send your spouse to the store looking for cream of tartar and having them come back with tartar sauce, because it's a powder found in the spice aisle, not a creamy dressing for your carrots. If you don't have cream of tartar or you can't find it in the store, just rub a lemon on the side of your bowl. And here's why. You want to stabilize your egg whites with an acid. When you first beat egg whites, they go from foaming, and then you incorporate more air by beating them and they get to soft peak stage, and then you beat them some more and they get to stiff peaks. And about 3 to 4 minutes after they hit that stiff peak stage, they release all their moisture, and then they get really soupy again at the bottom. And the only way to prevent that loss of moisture is to hit the egg whites with a little bit of acid. So rubbing a lemon on the side of the bowl is great. A lot of older cookbooks tell you to beat egg whites in a copper bowl, and that's because copper is slightly acidic, and it helps to stabilize the egg whites. But here we're using cream of tartar because, it stays forever in the pantry and it doesn't make my cookies taste like lemony at all. So I'm just going to take a little pinch, just a little tiny bit, and put it in the egg whites. So these macarons, especially with this method, which is the French method, are very delicate and can't support an extract, which is made with alcohol. They'll kind of burn and they'll make the meringue a little too toasty. So what I like to do is to incorporate the vanilla flavor by adding vanilla bean seeds. You can buy vanilla sugar, you can just use plain sugar, you don't have to add vanilla to it. But I want to show you real quickly how to make your own vanilla sugar, because it's kind of expensive when you buy it per ounce in the store. And I'll start off by actually showing you how to split the vanilla bean. So I'm just going to nick this right here, and I'm going to take my knife and just holding it horizontally, I'm just going to cut this all the way across. There we go. Just slowly but surely. Don't be afraid of dry vanilla beans. Vanilla beans that are too wet have been artificially cured in alcohol. So you want to make sure that you have a great bean that's got a little bit of oil on it and doesn't feel really wet. Vanilla beans take several months to cure, and it should be done outdoors in a really hot climate, not in a vat of alcohol. All right, so now I'm going to release the seeds by taking my knife and holding it very gently on about a 45-degree angle, and just taking about a quarter of the seeds out of the entire bean, just like that with my knife. And I'm going to put that in the sugar. Alternatively, you can just store some vanilla beans in a little mason jar of sugar and keep it there. It'll last forever. And within a day or so, your sugar will taste like vanilla. I love seeing the little seeds here from the vanilla bean in my sugar, because it looks just so darn pretty in the macaron. If you've got everything you need except almond flour, but you happen to have almonds, go ahead and do this. You're going to make your own nut flour, but very carefully so that you don't turn it into a nut paste. And the way you do that is by pulverizing the almonds with the powdered sugar. There's a little bit of cornstarch in the powdered sugar, and that will absorb any oil that gets dispersed when you put it in the food processor. So I'm going to put the powdered sugar in first, and then my nuts, because sometimes the blade doesn't really reach very well, so you don't want it to turn into a nut paste on the bottom and then have the powdered sugar on top. There we go. I'm putting my almonds in here. Just putting this right back on. I'm just going to pulse it until it's ready to go. Every few seconds or so, what you want to do is take a look inside. What I'm looking for is sort of a fine powder, and if I'm panning for gold, I still see some big sort of pieces of almond. So I'm going to pulverize it a little bit more until it feels finer. If you wanted to make pistachio macaron, you could put half almond flour, half pistachios, or half almonds, half pistachios into your food processor and make pistachio macaron. Pistachios and hazelnuts have a bit more oil in them than almonds do, so I don't like to replace them one for one. I always do kind of half almonds or half hazelnuts in order to make those cookies. And again, that's why we gave you the recipes by weight, so that it doesn't matter what size the nuts are, you're always going to be sure you're using the same amount. All right, check this out. Look how much finer it is. We're getting much, much smaller pieces. I'm going to run it for about 30 more seconds, and then we'll be good to go. Please be careful when you put your hand in here. We don't want anybody losing any digits when they're making macaron. All right, so we're pulverizing our almond flour and powdered sugar. Now let's test and see if it's ground finely enough. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this here and put it in my hand. Just kind of shake it. See if we see any big pieces here. And I don't really see any big pieces of almond flour. So really, I think we're there. So we're done. This is how you do it when you can't find almond flour. So now you've made your own homemade almond flour, which again, you could sub out half for pistachios. You can even make pecan macaron. I really like to do peanut butter and jelly macaron with replacing half of the almond flour with peanuts and then putting a little strawberry jam in between the macaron. I really want you to be very creative, following the techniques that we've showed you today. There are three kinds of macaron out there. You've got your coconut haystack, which is the American macaroon. It's got 2 O's in the name. And then you have the Italian Almaretti cookie. It's a very dense, chewy, almond paste-based cookie that's actually from Burgundy in France, but we'll let the Italians have that one. And then you have the Parisian macaron with 1 O, which is what we're making today. All of them are gluten-free and all of them are kosher for Passover, which is great because then you sort of can use these for any kind of holiday. And the beauty of them and the reason why you're seeing so many pastry shops with them now is because they're very, very simple to make in large quantities. And they actually improve with texture and flavor over time. Today we're doing the French method, but typically in a pastry shop, you'll see macarons that have a slightly shinier shell, and that uses the Italian method. The Italian method is very similar to what we did today, except you'll be heating up a sugar syrup, so water and sugar in a pot to 240 degrees, and pouring it over the egg whites after they've reached soft peak stage. You get those really stiff, and then you incorporate them into a nut paste, and then you continue as usual. So it's not exactly the same, but it uses the same ingredients. It's a little bit more difficult because you've got to have a candy thermometer, and you really have to pay attention to your egg whites a lot more. But if you're a pastry shop and you're making very large quantities, your egg whites are a lot more stabilized when you use the Italian method. For the home baker, for the home cook, I prefer the French method because it's super easy. You don't need to break out a lot of equipment, and it's just very simple to do in a very short amount of time. I like to break this up into 2 parts. A, my dry ingredients need to be pulverized, and B, my egg whites need to be whipped up. So we're going to take our powdered sugar and almond flour and place them in the food processor. Put the lid on it, and I'm just gonna pulse it for about a minute. I already added a little pinch of salt in there. So this is a lot easier than just doing it by hand. You could actually just turn it on and walk away. It's just a convenience thing. Okay, I'm gonna lift this up, and we're going to place all of our dry ingredients back in the bowl so that they're ready for us to use. And now I got to take care of my egg whites. So again, stand mixer makes it super easy. So I'm going to take my egg whites that have that little bit of cream of tartar in them, and I'm going to get them to soft peak stage. There are 3 stages to egg whites. When you first begin to beat them, they look really foamy and bubbly. The more air you incorporate into the egg whites, the whiter in color they're going to get. So they're going to lose their yellowish greenish tint, and they're going to start looking more pillowy and whiter. And the more air you beat into them, the stiffer and whiter they're going to look. Right around soft peak stage, and I'll show you what that looks like when we're there, you'll slowly stream in your sugar. And you want to make sure that you don't add your sugar too soon, because then it weighs down the egg whites and you'll never get the air that you want inside your macaron. The trick to a really good macaron is making sure that your egg whites stay nice and light and stiff as you're adding in your dry ingredients. And we'll talk about that more while we're folding, but ensuring that your egg whites get really stiff and get lots of lift is the secret to making it easier to combine the macaron later. So let's go ahead and get our egg whites going. I'm going to start beating them on high until they reach soft peak stage, and then I'll stream in the vanilla sugar. So remember, it's nice to have your egg whites at room temperature. It really does help them lift up nicer. We've added our cream of tartar in there. The cream of tartar is going to keep our egg whites nice and stable and stiff, even as we start to fold in our dry ingredients. Right now, we're still at foaming stage. And I like to turn it all the way up so that the beater really gets momentum and gets all the way to the edges of the egg whites. So we're leaving foaming stage and we're entering soft peak stage now. And this is how you can tell if you're at soft peak stage. If you take your little whisk here and you kind of pick up some of your egg whites and fold them onto themselves, they form these beautiful little pillowy clouds. There we go. But they don't fall and get really soupy. So we've incorporated enough air now that it's safe to add in our granulated sugar. So I'm going to put this on medium speed, because if I put it on high speed, the sugar's just going to fly out of the bowl. So medium speed, and I'm going to slowly stream in my vanilla sugar. Here we are. Now that I've got my sugar in there, I'm going to turn it all the way up and get these super stiff. And I can tell they're stiff enough when the egg whites completely pull away from the edges of the bowl. So watch pot never boils and egg whites never lift up if you watch them too long. So this would be a great time to step away and maybe put your dishes away so that you have space to do your piping and you feel like you have a nice clean open space. Kind of the advantage of using a stand mixer is you can beat the egg whites and kind of leave them alone. One little tip is that once you add sugar to egg whites, they can't really be overbeaten because the sugar will eventually liquefy and create a nice glossy glue for the egg whites. So, you know, it allows you to be flexible, walk away, and get something else done. If you take a look at these egg whites here, you start to see that they're stiffening up and they're starting to coagulate towards the center of the beater. And they're really pulling away from the edges. I'm going to show you what I'm trying to look for. So these are pretty stiff, and I'm going to test it out and show you real quickly. What I want to see is that stiff angle here, not looping over. So when I do this, do you see how this kind of came back down a little bit? What I'm looking for is something a little bit stiffer than this. This is, again, our insurance policy for not overfolding later. So I'm going to give this another 30 seconds or so that when I do this, the tip kind of stays straight up instead of folding back over. All right, so adding another 30 seconds here is really going to help us a lot, especially if you've never made macaron before. All right, so we gave these egg whites an extra 30 seconds, which really helps to stiffen them up. Do you see how much more they're pulling away from the sides of the bowl and how much they're coagulating in the center of the beater? This is what you're looking for. So I'm going to take this little thing here. See how nice and stiff they got? They're solid now. There's not sort of any moisture left over and there's not any movement. And now you can take this bowl here and test them out by doing this. They're nice and stiff. And we are ready to put everything together. We've cleared our space. It's time to incorporate the dry ingredients into the egg whites. Before we do that, let's really quickly talk about posture, because anytime you're in the kitchen making the same repetitive movement, you want to make sure you have good posture so you don't get too tired. So in a commercial kitchen, we always tell people to stand with your feet shoulder width apart and to really kind of relax. Your center is here. If you've ever taken a dance class, that's where it's at. And to make sure that you have your power come from the back of your shoulder, whether you're a lefty or a righty. When you are right-handed, you want to make sure you're going clockwise with your movement, and left-handers go counterclockwise. And always manipulate your bowl instead of your body. So I don't want to see you guys reaching like this. Just kind of tilt the bowl, make it work for you, and fold this way. And I'll teach you how to fold in a second. To start with, we're using a spatula. Again, whatever you have in your kitchen is what you should use, but when you're using a spatula, be sure that you're just using this. We don't want to flatten the egg whites and deflate them. So we're really just scraping and cleaning the bowl and flipping and scraping and flipping. And the way we do that is we tilt the bowl and really kind of scrape it and go for it. So let's do this. So when I'm taking the egg whites out of the bowl, I'm scraping them in one big swoop. If I do this a lot and try and really get them out of there, it's going to deflate the egg whites. So I want to be super efficient. Scrape them and flip them out. Scrape, get them out. Scrape, and get them out. So I've got my egg whites here now. I'm going to bring my dry ingredients over and grab my sifter here, and I'm going to incorporate the dry ingredients over the egg whites in 3 stages. So let me start with the first third. I'm just going to take about a third of my dry ingredients here. There we are, and just sift them. Doop, doop, doop. And the reason I'm sifting it over this is because I don't want to put anything heavy directly over the egg whites, so sifting it makes it sort of more delicate. And I'm getting all these little granules here. Again, remember, these are very delicate cookies, and having all these little spots of almond flour, even if you've processed them in the food processor, makes it a more delicate cookie. So this stuff, I'm not going to incorporate into the batter. All right, now it's time to fold. So I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to hold it as close to the head of the spatula as possible. If I hold it up here, I'm not going to have a lot of control. So when you're holding a utensil, be sure to really give it all you got. So I'm going to take my spatula, and because I'm right-handed, I'm going to move from noon to 8 p.m. So I'm going to start at the top here, scrape and flip. And I'm going to cut halfway through. And cutting halfway through really helps to get the stuff at the bottom. Here's what I don't want to see you do at home. Don't get really cautious and scared and just go around the edges. You really want to reach right down in there and flip. And reach and flip and cut halfway through. Reach and flip. Reach and flip and cut halfway through. And at first, it's going to look really weird and like it's not working. Don't worry about it. And I also don't want you to do this. Don't do this and then push down. This really deflates the egg whites. So we're just going to scrape and flip. And before it looks too pretty, we're going to add our next third. Add about half of what's left in here. Again, sifting. And again, we're sifting because we don't want to put anything heavy on these egg whites and cause them to deflate. So sifting helps to disperse these dry ingredients over the egg whites in a really light, powdery snow. Baking is really more about technique than exact, precise measurements. When I'm making biscuits, I remember this all the time. If I'm off by a tablespoon or 2 of flour, not a big deal as long as my butter is really cold. But if I measure everything perfectly and use warm butter, I'm not going to have flaky biscuits. The same is true here. I really want you to focus on this folding technique because that's the most important part of what you're doing today. All right, see? Scrape and flip. I'm really sort of scraping down here as well to get all those dry ingredients to be absorbed by the egg whites. All right? So now that we've absorbed our second set of dry ingredients, I'm going to add the rest. And now we're going to keep folding. This is not the time to be shy. I really want you to work on this folding technique because you're going to use it a lot in baking. Also, these ingredients can smell your fear, so act like you know. So we're really going to fold now, and what I want to do is be able to test for what's called a ribbon. And a ribbon is when you pick up about half of this batter and move it back and forth as it falls, and you'll see a pretty ribbon forming as it falls. I'll show you when it's not ready. Take a look at this. If I pick up half of my batter here and I slowly kind of move it back and forth, this is not a pretty ribbon. It's kind of thick and gloppy. So what I want to do is to really just kind of go for it here. And you'll see it's going to take, no more than a few folds. Now be careful of recipes, or be mindful of recipes that call for exactly 72 folds to get to the macaron stage, because their spatula might be half the size of yours. So I really want you to focus on what it's supposed to look like rather than the exact precise number of folds that it takes. So take a look at this. After just a few extra folds, it's starting to look more liquefied. Do you see that ribbon there? Okay, now let's take it a little bit further. It was still rather thick. So we're at the stage here where we're almost there. Take a look at this ribbon. It still feels a little bit thick. If I pipe these right now, I'm going to get a little hat at the top of the cookie, which is fine. We'll get a nice foot, but what happens when you nest them parallel to each other in a little box is if it has a little pointy hat, it's going to crush the cookie next to it, poke a little hole in it. So we want to make sure our cookies are nice and flat. So if I pipe these right now, they'll have a little hat on there, but I want a nice flat one. So I'm going to keep folding just a little bit more. If I fold too much, I won't get a foot on the cookie. So I'm going to show you what it's supposed to look like, and just a couple folds will be there. All right. Let's see this ribbon here. That looks really nice and smooth. I'm going to give it a couple more folds. All right, take a look at this. Do you see the smoothness of this ribbon? It's not quite liquidy. It still has a little bit of tension in it, and it's just perfect. So I'm going to get my piping bag ready and show you how to pipe these cookies. We'll let them dry, and then we'll bake them. Here we go. Again, I love these cookie sheets. They're my favorite. Here's how you fill the piping bag. I want you to hold it like this. If you're left-handed, hold it in your right hand. If you're right-handed, hold it like this, kind of like holding a funnel in your left hand. You're going to take some batter here and get it in the bag. All right, here we are. So now we're ready to pipe. I don't want you to use the crayon hold when you're holding your pastry bag. I want you to clamp it here and squeeze from here. So what you want to do is to hold your tip just above the paper. Place it right here, squeeze, staying at the same spot, and then opening up your hand and then lifting. If you squeeze from up here, you get a big pile of doo-doo. If you place your tip on the paper, it comes out real misshapen. So really you want your tip to be at the same height as the cookie, which is really thin. So go ahead and place your tip right there, squeeze, open your hand, and then pull up. If you squeeze and then keep squeezing as you pull up, you get this bit here. See how much more batter there is in there? When we try and bake this off, this part will stay really raw and the cookie will be very difficult to peel off the paper. So again, you hold your piping bag here, you squeeze, open your hand, and then pull up. Squeeze, open your hand, pull up. Squeeze, open your hand, and pull up. You want all the macarons to be at least this far apart on the cookie sheet, and you want them to be all about the same size, because when we bake these off, this guy here is going to be underbaked and these will be overbaked. So you want them all to be about the same size, which is why I like this technique. If you hold your bag like this, like a machine, and just count 1, 2, 3, open your hand, pull up, you'll end up having the same size cookie over and over again on the cookie sheet. Let me show you how to make hearts, because as long as the circumference of the heart is about the same size as the circles, then you should be all right to put them on the same cookie sheet. I start here, I squeeze, and then I release the pressure as I pull. And then I squeeze and release pressure as I pull, just having those two meet up. Remember to make an even number, because these are sandwich cookies. There we go. You can also make a teddy bear like that. Squeeze, and then just make 2 little dots like this. Oh, I love doing Easter bunnies. Let me show you. This is really cute. So you do this. I'm going to make a second one. So I have to make sure I have enough batter because I'm getting down to the end. And just squeeze some little ears like that. I'm going to pipe a couple tiny little tails here. So I'm going to let these dry for about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to turn my oven on to 350 degrees, maybe 325 if I'm using convection, and then we'll bake them off. We'll make buttercream and fill them. Okay, the macarons are drying. It's time to make our buttercream. We're gonna make the buttercream and divide it into different bowls to make a few different flavors. Then we're gonna make some salted caramel, which I love because not only is it great for sandwiching between macarons, but it's delicious to eat with a spoon or over ice cream or with pie. In any case, let's go ahead and start with the buttercream. What you're gonna need are some egg whites, some sugar, and some butter, because all the greatest things in life are made with butter. And I like to add a little pinch of salt, you know, to balance out the sweetness. Make sure your butter is unsalted for this. So what I'm gonna do first is to take these egg whites here and place them in my KitchenAid bowl. If you're using a handheld mixer, go ahead and place your bowl directly over the double boiler and put your handheld mixer into the bowl and do this all in one step. Sugar. And I like this recipe because the sugar gets dissolved. Unlike many recipes where you're using just powdered sugar and butter, over time the sugar tends to crystallize and it gets crunchy. This is the smoothest buttercream you'll ever eat. It's the one I use to decorate cakes. It's just lovely. So I'm going to take this bowl here that's got the sugar and the egg whites, and over the double boiler, I'm just going to whisk it until I touch these egg whites and they feel hot to the touch. You don't have to be super fast with this. You want to keep this moving so you don't end up with a vanilla omelet later. And double boiling, really all it is getting a pot, filling it with water, letting it come to a simmer, and then just placing your bowl directly above it. This is just a much more gentle way of warming up the egg whites so they don't overcook. So here we go. My egg whites and sugar are nice and hot. The sugar's all dissolved in there. I'm going to turn my stove off here and move this over to the KitchenAid. Great, and I'm going to beat it on high. I'm going to beat these for about a minute and a half until this feels like it's room temperature again, and get my butter ready. I'm going to add a little pinch of salt here. And I'm going to wait until I get stiff peaks in here. What we're doing right now is incorporating a lot of air into here, so it's cooling this egg white and sugar mixture, this meringue. And once it's fully cooled, we can start to add our butter. If I add the butter right now, it's just going to liquefy and be a big mess. So let's turn it all the way up and get our butter ready. My butter is already cut up into little pieces, which really helps it get to room temperature. And in a moment, when I can feel like this is room temperature, I'm going to add the butter in little pieces. So our egg whites are nice and stiff. Look at that, the meringue. And this feels like it's room temperature now. We're going to turn it to medium speed now and slowly incorporate the butter. A few pieces at a time. There we go. Take a little dip in there. You want to make sure you're using unsalted butter for a few reasons. To begin with, salted butter differs in its amount of salt as the different seasons progress. So dairy farmers add different amounts of salt to their salted butter to control shipping and refrigeration. And it also has a longer shelf life. So salted butter isn't quite as fresh as unsalted butter. Sweet cream and unsalted butter are essentially the same thing. They're just unsalted. And I like to control exactly how much salt is in my recipes, so I like to use unsalted butter for that reason. If all you have at home is salted butter, don't worry about it. Just don't add salt to your recipe. And that goes for making cupcakes, pies, muffins, brownies, whatever. So, here we are, we're almost there. Once I've added all the butter in there, I'm going to turn it all the way up and get it nice and smooth. If your buttercream looks really curdled, it's usually because your butter was too cold. So I recommend picking up your bowl and warming it up over the double boiler just for a few seconds and then beating it some more. Don't worry if it looks curdled, it just means that the butter's too cold. If your buttercream is really runny, it just means everything was too warm. So just stick the bowl in the freezer for 20 minutes, bring it back out and re-whip it. So take a look at the buttercream. It's really smooth, but I want to make it even smoother. And this is a great tip when you're decorating cakes. If your buttercream looks like this, which is smooth, but looks like it has air pockets in it, all you need to do is to put the paddle attachment on or hit it with a wooden spoon and stir it real quickly, and it'll make it incredibly super smooth. Before we smooth out our buttercream, I want to add some vanilla bean to it. Remember that bean that you used to make the macarons? I hope you didn't throw it away because you can actually use it for your buttercream here. Remember this? We don't even need to scrape it anymore. We're going to drop it in here and we're going to keep beating it until the whisk releases the rest of the seeds, and then we'll fish it out later. It's a great way to reuse the bean. So the whisk is actually just moving that bean around, releasing the rest of the seeds. It's less waste. If you don't have a vanilla bean, that's okay. Just use some vanilla extract in here. All right. So to make this buttercream even smoother, we're going to switch to the paddle attachment. If you don't have the paddle attachment, just get a wooden spoon and really stir it up a little bit. And that'll punch out the rest of the air in the buttercream and make it very, very smooth. All right, I'm going to hit it with a paddle and watch this. Almost instantly, this buttercream smooths out. Great, look at that. I'm going to take this buttercream and split it into 3 different bowls to show you how to make 3 different flavors of buttercream just using this one base. We've got our plain buttercream, and I want you to be super creative with this and make it whatever you like. Today, we're gonna make chocolate buttercream, raspberry buttercream, and vanilla buttercream, all with the same base that we already made. Not much more work to do. And the first thing we have to do is to melt our chocolate. So I'm gonna take this bowl here, got some little chocolate discs. We love Cordillera chocolate, which is a brand from Colombia, but really any great chocolate will do. If you're using milk chocolate, just know that it'll be a little bit more fluid buttercream than if you were to use dark, because there's more fat content in milk chocolate than there is in dark chocolate. So here I've got a 65%, and I'm going to place it here over the double boiler. If you're using a glass bowl like I am, make sure it's tempered glass so that it doesn't shatter. But you know, a metal bowl will do just fine. And I'm just going to place it on top of the double boiler here until it's melted. I hear a lot of times that, you know, double boilers ask for just a little bit of water in a pot and then in a bowl directly above it. The idea of a double boiler is to give it a really gentle, even heat. Steam from boiling water is hotter than the water itself. So having a little bit of water and a lot of steam and then a bowl is actually a lot harsher for what's in your bowl than if the water is gently touching it. So be careful when you're melting chocolate that water can't get into the bowl, because water and chocolate don't really like each other. But make sure also that there isn't a lot of space for steam. So I like just a gentle simmer, put the bowl over the double boiler, and just stir it till it's melted. So when you're melting chocolate, I want you to be really aware that chocolate is very sensitive to heat. So you want to move it around, and I like to kind of fold it over so that the bottom chocolate goes to the top and the top cooler chocolate goes down to the bottom. You should also know that chocolate kind of melts itself. So as the chocolate is melting, it'll kind of melt itself. And before the chocolate is completely melted, you'll pull it off the heat and just stir it till it works itself out. So right now, I'm just gonna keep melting it. Our chocolate has melted, so now we're just gonna let it cool for a few minutes. And while it's cooling, I'm gonna show you how to make the raspberry buttercream. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a little bit of our buttercream here and add it to some freeze-dried fruit. So this right here is freeze-dried raspberries. You can buy the freeze-dried fruit in the cereal aisle, typically of the supermarket, and it comes in everything from banana to mango to raspberry to blueberry, and it adds a lot of color and a lot of flavor. So here we go. I'm just gonna put a little bit of buttercream in there. And I'm going to stir it up all together. I like to crush them up a bit so I get a really pretty color on the buttercream. Our second flavor is the vanilla buttercream. I know we have some vanilla bean seeds in there from when we put in the vanilla bean earlier, but I want to pump it up with a little bit more vanilla flavor. So I'm going to grab this little bit of vanilla extract here and just put a tiny bit of it in there. Really important to make sure that you're buying extracts. Even if it says natural flavor, flavors are always artificial. So make sure that you buy extracts over flavors. There we go. So we've got raspberry buttercream, vanilla buttercream. Let's do the chocolate buttercream. It's my favorite. Let me check to make sure that the chocolate's cool enough. Oh, well, it looks like I have to taste it. Yeah, that works. If the chocolate's too warm, what happens then is that it melts the buttercream and makes it a little too liquidy. So you need to make sure and do some quality control and ensure that the chocolate's not too hot, that it'll melt the butter. If it does, don't worry about it. Stick it in the refrigerator for a few minutes, then take it back out and re-whip it. But it's not the end of the world, and it's nice to be able to taste your chocolate. All right, so let's grab our buttercream, what's left of it. And I'm actually going to add only a little bit of this chocolate. What I like to do is to spread a little bit of the melted chocolate inside the macaron shell and then put some chocolate buttercream, so you get a little bit of a crunch from the chocolate that's just plain and melted, and then you get the smoothness of the chocolate buttercream. It's kind of like a chocolate double whammy. It's not such a terrible thing. So I'm gonna add a little tiny bit of this melted chocolate here and just stir it in. The darker the chocolate you use, obviously the stiffer your buttercream will be, and the darker, more chocolatey flavor you'll get. Dark chocolate has a more intense chocolate flavor, so the darker chocolate you go, the more intense your buttercream will be. If you use a milk chocolate, it'll be sweeter and it'll also be runnier because there's more fat in milk chocolate. So do as you like now that you know how to choose between the two. I'm gonna add a little bit more because I love some chocolate. There we are. If you wanted to make this mocha buttercream, just add a little bit of coffee to this. Coffee extract, a little bit of espresso, whatever you want to add to it. There we are. So we have our 3 different buttercream flavors. Let's go ahead and make our salted caramel. Then we'll bake off our cookies and assemble everything together. All right, we've made buttercream, and buttercream's just fine, but really what I love is salted caramel. It's really dangerous. For all of you pregnant ladies out there, it is the most dangerous because it hits both your sweet spot and your savory spot. So anyway, let's get started with salted caramel. My big rule with making caramel is that I don't stir it very much, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Also, I don't use candy thermometers or corn syrup, so let's get this going. You're gonna take some sugar here and place it in your pot. And then I like to add about a tablespoon of water. Here we go. And a teaspoon of lemon juice. And the lemon juice keeps the sugar from crystallizing too much. It's a little bit of acid, which is good. Let's turn this stove on here. And I'm going to swirl it about just once, and then I'm going to leave it alone. And the reason I leave it alone is because if you agitate your sugar a lot, if you move it around while it's melting, what happens is that you get a lot of cold sugar crystals on top and melted sugar on the bottom, and it melts really unevenly. So I really recommend taking your wooden spoon, and I prefer a wooden spoon to a silicone or even a metal spoon, and leaving it here so you don't get tempted to move it around too much, and let the sugar begin to liquefy on its own. Again, don't agitate it because air will get into the sugar and it'll cool it down instead of letting it melt. Every now and then take a peek at it, make sure that it's liquefying nicely. And by liquefying, it means the sugar is turning into a liquid. Whenever I'm baking, I always think of sugar as a liquid ingredient because of this. When you apply heat to sugar, it liquefies and becomes a liquid. The opposite is true with eggs. When you add heat to an egg, it becomes a solid. So when you're baking, think of these things. It doesn't really have much to do with caramel, but it'll really help out when you're making cakes and such. So right now, I'm waiting for the sugar to liquefy. As soon as it liquefies, it will start turning brown. Caramelization happens after evaporation. And the easiest way to remember this is to think about onions. When you put onions in a hot pan, they very quickly steam up and then begin to caramelize. And the same is true with sugar, except there's a lot less water in sugar, so it happens really quickly. So here we go. We're starting to hear a little bit of action here. So while we're waiting for our sugar to liquefy, let's go take a look at our macarons and see if they're almost ready to bake. They are looking really good. When we first piped these, they were really shiny. And as they sat, they began to dry. And now when I touch them, nothing gets on my finger. They have a little crust on them. They don't look shiny anymore. They form a sort of a matte finish on them. So this would be a great time to turn the oven on. Take a look at the sugar right now. We haven't stirred it, which is really, really good. And now that it's starting to liquefy, I want you to think of your spoon as a tool to move the sugar so that it melts evenly. So you're not looking to really whip this up. You're going to gently coax the sugar so that the wet sugar moves off the hot spots and the dry sugar gets melted. Just like the chocolate, the sugar is going to melt itself. So just see how I'm slowly just moving it about. Here we are. And right now our caramel, or our melted sugar here, looks quite grainy. I'm going to wait till it looks a little bit more see-through before I add my cream. Now when you're making caramel, you need to think about the amount of fat you're adding. If you're making hard caramel candies, you'll use very little fat. If you're making a caramel sauce to go over ice cream, you want a lot of fat because you want it to be super fluid. We're going to spread a thin layer of this caramel between the 2 macarons, so we need just the right amount of fat. And the fat in this case comes from heavy cream and some good butter. We're going to flavor this with some sea salt. The salt we're using is from France. It's a good gray salt. The more color there is in the salt, the less processed it is, and the more oceany it tastes. So as soon as we add our heavy cream, we'll also be adding the salt. If you want to add a little bit of vanilla, you'll also add it right after the heavy cream. This is a good time to gently coax it again. So I'm going to wait till I get more color here in my caramel before I add the cream. And the cream's great because not only does it sort of give a softness and fluidity to our caramel, but it stops the caramelization of the sugar. So if you want that deep golden flavor, wait till it just gets to that state and then quickly add your heavy cream. And the heavy cream stops the caramelization and create some more fluid caramel. And then we'll sort of give some more unctuous texture to our caramel by adding some butter. If you don't have sea salt at home, just add a little salted butter to your caramel. That'll take care of it. Do you see how we're starting to get some color on our caramel here? I want to wait till this looks a little bit darker and more see-through, because right now it still looks a bit grainy. All right, look at this beautiful caramel color we have here. I'm going to get this just a teensy bit darker. It smells really good. Okay, I've reached the color that I want in my caramel, and it's gorgeous, and it smells a tiny bit burnt, which I love. And I'm going to dump in the heavy cream all at once. Isn't that beautiful? All right, and I'm going to add in a few pinches of this gorgeous sea salt. And I'm going to cook this down for just a few more seconds. I want this to be thicker. If you have a really thin pot, it'll happen very quickly. If you have a thicker pot, it might take a little bit longer. But you just want to notice that your caramel's thickened up quite a bit. And this is going to make your kitchen smell so good. If you happen to have an apple nearby, it's a really good vessel to taste this with. Be careful because it's really hot. All right, and now I'm ready to add my butter. I'm going to cut it into a couple little pieces. There we are. And now that my caramel has thickened up a bit, I'm going to add this butter. Once I've added the butter, I'm going to cook it down until it's the thickness that I want. The more you cook the caramel down, the more moisture evaporates and the thicker the caramel will be. There we are. You're also in less danger of burning this because there's more moisture in the pot. Look at that. You have just made caramel without corn syrup, without the need for a candy thermometer, just with a watchful eye and some good instincts. I'm going to add a little bit of vanilla to this while it's cooking down. Remember how we split the vanilla bean earlier? Just going to cut a little bit end off here, and then I like to split it horizontally like that. Nice and smooth. There we are. Open it up. And I'm going to hold my knife again at a 45-degree angle and gently press it along. You don't want to apply too much pressure because you'll pull up the fibers of the bean, which are a little bit bitter and don't have all the flavor that the seeds have. And I'm just going to put these seeds in here, and I'll take that half and stick it right in the pot. It doesn't matter how much or how little you use. It's all about adding just the right amount of flavor for your taste. All right, I want my caramel to thicken a little bit more because these are going into the macaron. And if it's super runny, it's just going to fall off the cookie. So I'm going to cook it down just a little bit more. And then my trick to cool this quickly is to pour it onto a cookie sheet. You can do this on a plate, on a cookie sheet, just a nice large surface so that the caramel can cool a bit faster. Don't put this directly into the refrigerator. If you get a really big shock of humidity or temperature difference, you'll find that the fat separates. You get like a layer of butter on top and then some harder caramel. So this is the fastest and safest way to chill your caramel. We are about 30 seconds to nirvana here. So this is how I test. See how runny this is? I want this to feel a little bit thicker than that. I can feel the caramel getting thicker. Do you see how I move my spoon around and you can see the bottom? It kind of stays apart. My caramel's gotten a bit thicker. It's coating the spoon a lot more. So our caramel is nice and thick and it's bubbling up. It's coating the spoon and dripping more slowly in a thicker sort of pattern. Watch that. And it'll thicken pretty dramatically as it cools. So don't worry if it still looks a little bit runny. As it cools, it'll get a lot thicker. I'm going to pour this right here onto the cookie sheet, kind of spread it everywhere. Oh my God, it's so good. There we are. Keep the vanilla bean in there to keep flavoring it up. And if you feel like you got some little sugar crystals in there, just strain this through a strainer or just kind of pour it carefully so you don't get those sugar crystals, but it's not the end of the world. As much as you want to taste this right now, I would recommend waiting about 10 minutes because it's really, really hot. So let this cool and hang out for a little bit, and then, grab a spoon and start eating it, or grab a piece of apple or a pear or a piece of chocolate. Whatever you need to taste this, it's really, really delicious. Okay, the macarons are in the oven right now, and I wanted to take this time to show you a few tricks about how to use a pastry bag correctly. Because often in class, I see people really struggle with it or hold it the wrong way, and it really doesn't have to be very difficult. When you're purchasing a pastry bag, always make sure it's a big size. It's just a lot easier, because rule number one of using a pastry bag is never filling it more than halfway up. Here's why. When I'm filling the pastry bag, I like to take it and I put my hand through it and fold it over halfway. That way I know I'm not filling it more than halfway up. Because if you fill it more than halfway, half the buttercream is going to come out the pastry bag the other way. No bigger buzzkill than a dirty pastry bag. So doing it this way and folding it over is a sure way to keep the outside of the pastry bag nice and clean and give you more control. So let's put some of our raspberry buttercream in here so I can show you. I'm going to take the buttercream and just spoon it right in there. This technique of how to use and fill the pastry bag is the same that you would use to decorate a cake. All right, so we've got our buttercream in here. Let me just move this over a little bit and show you how to hold a pastry bag correctly. It's nice to make a double batch of buttercream so you can practice this, because you can pipe it on, scrape it off, put it back in the bag, and over again. If the buttercream feels really soft while you're practicing, just put it in the fridge for a little bit and re-whip it up. Okay. So to start with, again, you don't want the crayon holes on the pastry bag. I like to think of a twisty tie clamp. So I clamp where the frosting ends, or the filling, or whatever you've got in your pastry bag. You don't do it down here, and you don't do it up here. You literally just push everything down and clamp it right there. I squeeze using this part of my hand. So you clamp and squeeze. And when I'm holding my pastry bag, I'm perpendicular to my surface. So we have our raspberry buttercream all sort of bagged up in our piping bag. Let's do the other flavors now. We're going to do one of the flavors right here in a pastry bag, and I'll show you how to insert the tip, and then I'll show you how to do the vanilla one inside a Ziploc bag so you have that alternative if you need it. All right, so what you want to do is to cut a hole at the tip here. And I really like these disposable bags because I reuse them up to 12 times, sometimes more. And they get a lot cleaner than the waxy sort of kind. All right, so I folded it over, and I'm going to take this little piece here called a coupler. There's a mommy part and a daddy part. I'll leave it to you. There's this little part here that goes into the bag. And then if you need to cut it additionally here, you can, because you want the plastic to be nice and flush with the coupler at the end of the bag. Here we go. So you push it right through. And I'm going to take the little piece here and put it on. And then you tighten it up with the outer part of the coupler. I like the idea of using couplers because you can switch out the tip without changing out the entire bag. It's really nice to be able to switch out the tip without switching out the whole bag, because you might be piping some leaves on a decorated cake and then think, oh, I want to do green flower petals as well. And instead of changing out the whole bag, you can literally just unscrew this here and change out the tip to another kind and then screw it right back on. All right, so let's put some chocolate buttercream in here. Here we are. Again, I'm going to put that right in there. See how nice it is to be able to scrape the buttercream against your hand here? This is my favorite way to fill a pastry bag. All right, so again, pinch it here, lift the bag back up, like so, and then clamp it and get the filling all the way down here. Here we are. So we've got our raspberry buttercream and our chocolate buttercream, and I'm going to show you now how to use a Ziploc bag, because you might not have a pastry bag at home, you might not want to run to the store and get one. Not a problem. I really encourage you to improvise. I like to use the heavy-duty Ziploc bags for this because the warmth of your hand can kind of sort of melt and warp a really thin bag. So again, a nice big one is really helpful. I open it up and I do the same thing. I kind of fold it over here. There we go, over my hand. All right, do you see that? and I have the tip right here that I can insert. You can put a little pastry tip in here in the same way that we did with the pastry bags, but really, if you don't have a pastry bag, chances are you don't have a pastry tip either. So really simple to do. I want you to cut a very, very small hole out of this bag. It does tend to stretch and expand, so cut a tiny hole sort of on a bias here in the very corner of your Ziploc bag. Yeah. And now do the same thing. You're going to fill it the same way. Let's get this vanilla buttercream in here. Scrape it in. Alrighty, there we go. Same thing, pinch it. Lift the rest of the bag up. Be careful that all of it doesn't come out because it's not quite as secure as if you had a tip in there, but here you go, you've got your own homemade pastry bag. And you can use this for the actual macaron batter. It will be a little bit more fluid coming out because it doesn't have the structure here of these pastry tips. So just be cautious when you're doing it. So we've got our 3 fillings now. We've got our raspberry buttercream, we have our chocolate buttercream, and we've got our vanilla buttercream here in our handmade Ziploc bag, pastry bag, since we're super crafty. And I'm going to bring out some macarons and show you how to fill them and put them together. I'm super happy with these because they're nice and flat on top and the foot is just perfect. It didn't squeeze out too much on the edges here and they all just look really lovely and fully cooked. So now let me show you how to unmold them. A really common mistake is just to lift the cookie off the paper, which is fine with this one here, but sometimes your batches will not be fully sealed at the bottom, which doesn't mean it's a bad cookie. It happens very, very often. So what I want you to do instead is to think about pulling the paper off the cookie. So here's what you're going to do. I want you to pick up this paper here, or your silicone mat, whatever you piped these onto. And just like the little dot candies you had at camp, I want you to peel the paper off the cookie. So I kind of hold the cookie in one place and peel the paper off, just like that. If you end up with a lot of meat on the paper, don't worry. You can put them back in the oven for a couple of minutes on the bottom shelf. Don't leave it there because it'll burn to help you along. But it's not a terrible thing to lose a little bit of meat. I mean, these cookies are fully cooked, so I wouldn't worry about it and stress about it. Next time, just try not piping so thick. That typically happens when you pipe too much batter and then it can't really fully dry out and set up. Our little macarons are perfect. They're all lined up, ready to be filled. Let's go get our fillings and put them together because we're about 5 minutes away from eating them. Hang on a second. Let's start off by getting some raspberry ones together. You can do this with a spatula or a little spoon or even a butter knife, or you can use their piping bag. So with the same technique that we did to pipe the macaron, you're gonna pipe the filling on. Here we are. I'm just going to pipe a little bit of filling right in the center here. And I'm going to take the top cookie and just place it right on top, just like that. There we go. Macaron number 1. Let's make this one chocolate right here. We're going to put a little bit of melted chocolate right there on the cookie. Look at that. Yummy. And I'm going to pipe a little bit of chocolate buttercream right over that. Look how smooth and pretty that looks. And again, taking the top cookie and just gently placing it on. Just like that. All right, so let's keep going. Now I've got my beautiful homemade bag right there. Here's some vanilla. We can have vanilla on vanilla here. And there we are. And I like to twist it sometimes just so it can be nice and even. If you've got a lot sort of squeezing out, you can use your finger to just smooth it out like that, all the way around the macaron. All right, so I'm gonna start moving my beautiful little finished macaron onto a cake plate. So raspberry, vanilla, and chocolate, and of course, like we can mix and match. So maybe with the next one, we take a little bit of chocolate, as we did before. There we are. And I'm going to put a little bit of raspberry on this one here. Got a little piece of raspberry stuck in there. Not a problem. There we are. And same thing. You can kind of do this to get it all the way to the edges. So I want to do the salted caramel now. Let's move these pastry bags out of the way so we have some room and break out the caramel. All right, here we are. I don't use a pastry bag to get the caramel on. You just want a thin coating, almost like jam, because it's so powerful in flavor and just incredibly wonderful. So here we are. I'm going to spoon this on, or just spread it like this very carefully so that you don't break the macaron, because it's quite thick now. And you can use this spreading instead of the piping bag for any of the fillings, really. I'm going to put its match on there. Just squeeze very gently. And that is the first of our salted caramel macarons. Why don't we do one more of these? Just because I love them. Sometimes the caramel hardens up a bit, and you can put it right over a double boiler if you like, or if it's in a bowl, put it in the microwave for just a moment. But this is just perfect, like so. All right, sandwich them just like that. You know, this isn't the cleanest macaron I have, so I think that I should eat it. So, oh my God, it's chocolate, it's caramel. It only has a little bit of crunch on the outside, and the cookie is soft. I'm very happy right now. Great job. The macarons are finished. The best way to store them is in a little box or in a Tupperware container in the freezer, or in a cute little box like this. I like these boxes because they have the little tiny indentations for each of the cookies. So now that our macarons are cold, I put them in the freezer for about a half hour so they could settle in nicely. I'm going to put them in this box. Look how beautiful. And your friends and family can see the little macaron through the window here. I made a few batches so you could see the common mistakes that you can make and how they show up once you've baked the cookie off. So let's look at the difference between underfolding and overfolding. Do you remember when we were discussing about the difference between overfolding and underfolding, and how when you underfold, you don't quite fold as much, you don't get as flat a cookie. You kind of get a little hat or a bump on top of the cookie. Let me show you this row here. See these 4 cookies here? These are underfolded. They've got like a little hat on top, and later on when we go and sandwich them and box them up nicely next to each other, this little top here is going to poke the cookie next to it. So these are slightly underfolded. The foot, which is the crinkly edge around the bottom of the cookie, is much higher when you underfold. There's a lot more air in the batter because you haven't folded all the air out. So I want to show you another quick variation. Do you see these 3 here? How they look a little bit oblong and a little funny here. They're sort of sealed at the bottom and don't have an even foot. When you hold your pastry bag on a bias or you're too close to the paper, you're going to get this sort of funny shape. When you're making macarons, it's nice to have them all look nice and perfect and even. It's not really a very rustic sort of operation. These little things really help you to get sort of the perfect macaron each time. These all over here have a nice sized foot. It's just a little bit apart from the cookie here. It's got a nice size, and they baked up quite nicely. This row of macarons here were piped too thick. Do you remember when I showed you how to pipe and then I kind of squeezed and came up as I squeezed and I got too much batter? These are a little bit thick, and you'll notice here that this one got dimpled and broke. That's because there was too much batter in there. It was too heavy and it didn't bake up properly, so they're kind of raw on the inside. Let me show you now what happens when you overfold. This tray came from a really overfolded batch. And that means that we folded so much that we took most of the air out of the batter. When you fold all the air out of the batter, you end up with something very runny, and there's no air left in the cookie so that it can lift up and dry on the inside later and form a nice foot. So here's what we've got here. They're kind of wrinkly on top, and they're all misshapen, and they've got a really uneven, very, very thin foot. This one's a classic example of overfolding. There's nothing really that can make these cookies lift up in the oven other than those little pockets of air that you leave in there by not overfolding. So when you overfold, you get a very soupy kind of batter, and when they go into the oven, there's not much lift that can happen. So they stay very small and short, and they tend to seal up here in some areas and not form a foot at all. They also look a little bit lumpy here, again, because they don't bake up evenly. So you can see here, this is overfolding. If this is happening to you, next time you make the macaron, fold a little bit less. So I've got a third pan here to show you what else can happen. So here we go. These right here are burnt. They look really great. They've got a little bit of a hat on top, so they're a little underfolded, and they've got a nice foot, but the oven was just a little too hot. The other way that you can tell that your oven's too hot is if sometimes your macarons dome up and crack. That means your oven's much too hot, and I would use it at a much lower temperature. If you have a convection oven at home, always use it about 40 degrees lower than the recipe calls for. Whether you're making macarons or a cake, you need to sort of remove some of the heat that's being circulated around by the fan in the convection oven by lowering the temperature a bit. Also, older ovens tend to be hotter. They're darker on the inside and things brown more quickly. So just play with your oven a little bit. Don't worry about being exact with the temperature. I want you to just work with what you have. So I'd never throw these away even if they're not perfect. I'm going to pick the prettiest ones and fill them with some buttercream, and then the rest of them I would make a macaron ice cream cake with. So, peel them off the paper, put a little parchment paper down on a pie pan or a cake pan on the very bottom, press all these macarons in there, pour some ice cream over that and freeze it, and the next day flip it over, unmold it, and you've got this really cool kind of meringue crisp crust around the ice cream, and it's really delicious. And if you have any salted caramel left over, pour that over at the same time, and it's not so bad. So never throw them away. Don't despair. This recipe just makes one cookie sheet, so if you want to do a couple practice runs over a couple of hours on a Saturday, not a big deal. But this is what to look out for. Thank you for taking the time to make macarons with me. I hope you learned that these are not that difficult to make, that with really simple technique and paying attention to the ribbon and your piping technique, you can easily make macarons on your own at home. I look forward to seeing you again, and happy macaron making. Goodbye.